Thank you, John. My name is Richard Jimerson. I'm going to talk a bit about IPv6 over the decades at ARIN. We started in the 1990s. We're getting ready to go into our fourth decade of IPv6 promotion inside this community. That's pretty staggering. What's coming in the 2020s next year? Yes, it'll happen. Got to see the slides at the end. So, of course, we started in the mid-1990s. There were people in this room that were involved in the IPNG project back in the mid-1990s when we were talking about IPv4 running out. People heard in the mid-1990s that IPv4 would be gone very soon, and that really worked against us about 20 or 15 years later when we were telling them, no, really it is running out. And they said, yeah, I've heard that before. I don't want to hear it again. But in 1999, the IETF had created IPv6 and delegated an eighth of the entire IPv6 address space to the IANA for further issuance to the then three regional internet registries. ARIN received its first block, and we pretty quickly made our first IPv6 allocation to ESNet using an allocation framework that had been recommended by the IETF, because at the time the policy hadn't put together, or the community hadn't put together policies on how we would issue that space. So the IETF gave some recommendations on how we would do that. You remember them, TLA, sub-TLA, NLA, SLA. Then we got into the 2000s. ARIN began its outreach right in 2000 at these meetings. 2001, the IEB and the ISG published a recommendation on IPv6 allocations. And then the policy community actually started doing policy work. So basically, the IETF came and said, these are our updated recommendations on how you should issue this space, and they invited the policy communities in each regional internet registry to start having discussions with each other about how they think that that should change in each of the regions, and we began that work. 2003, the board began implementing fee waivers for IPv6, and that happened throughout the years. Also in the mid-2000s, the ARIN staff, board, and AC began conducting outreach, including trade shows and industry conferences. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. The board passed resolutions advising the internet community on migration to IPv6. We opened an IPv6 wiki. We started talking on social media about the need to pay attention to IPv4 depletion and to adopt IPv6. And the organization actually sent certified postal letters from ARIN to every member executive with notice of IPv4 depletion and the need to adopt IPv6. Just in case they weren't seeing it in the footer on every ticket response that we send out from ARIN that said that this was coming and this was happening. And this was a big due diligence effort inside the organization. We did not want to reach depletion inside the ARIN region and have organizations come to us and say, we had no idea that this was happening. So we wanted to create a state where that was not possible. And we didn't get any of those emails, by the way, when we did finally deplete the IPv4 address space in 2015. Early in the 2010s, we launched Team ARIN. We had a speakers bureau, outreach calendar. We had a community use slide deck that people could download. We would actually ship people a care package of stickers and handouts and those types of things if they wanted to promote IPv6 inside their own community groups or inside their own organizations. In 2011, the IANA exhausted the global IPv4 free pool. They had no more /8s or Class A's to hand out to the regional internet registries. We each had our final block of IPv4 address space from the IANA. We started doing contests and other outreach. ARIN and the other regional internet registries participated in World IPv6 Day, and the year after that, World IPv6 launch. The Internet Society used their convening powers to bring people together and do these two great events early in the 2010s that made a big impact on deployment inside the community. In 2014, we kicked off new campaigns for IPv6 enabling web content, because before that we were really concentrating on vendors who were putting IPv6 support into their hardware products and also on internet service providers. Again, in 2015, ARIN did run out of their IPv4 free pool, and we started the waiting list for unmet requests. In 2016, we started building a list of hosting and DNS providers that supported v6 and v6 trainers and consultants. We started publishing case studies a few years ago in 2017, and we continue to do that today. And we've gotten a lot of community support on those. And earlier this year, for the first time, ARIN created a grant program. And one of the ways that you could be considered for a grant is if you could get funding for informational outreach related to IPv6 deployment. And one of our grant recipients was specifically doing that for IPv6. Some examples of the types of things that we've done throughout the years. Stood on a lot of booths, went to a lot of events, and talked to a lot of people. I think there are probably people in this room that volunteered their own personal time to come with ARIN to these events. There are probably people right here who could raise their hand if I asked the question, how many of you gave up 4 days of your life going to a CES, not to just stand on a booth, but to walk booth to booth for all the other vendors with a clipboard in your hand where everywhere you had to go, and you spent 12 hours walking 4 days straight, just talking until you couldn't talk anymore, to vendors pleading with them to put IPv6 support into their products. How many people here actually did that, if you could raise your hand? Some of you are still in the room. Yes, he did, actually. I remember talking with Bill Standerford the first day that he came to do one of these events. He couldn't believe we were actually doing it, and then he proceeded with actually walking 12-hour days to booths 4 days in a row. It was amazing. And there are others of you in the room that were working with ARIN, but you were running your own independent efforts to promote IPv6 adoption inside the community. I can see a few of you in the room right now. But all of these things here involved all of you in the room, and some of us who aren't still here today at the meeting getting these things done to support the effort. And of course, the ARIN board over the years has made sure that the ARIN organization itself has ate its own dog food in relation to IPv6. So what are some of the impacts? Now, all of this work that we did together as a community, we played a part in these impacts that you see here, but there are so many other people who have done the same thing. 59.5% of ARIN members have IPv6 allocations today. 26% of our end user customer organizations have IPv6 assignments today. Over 6,800 total IPv6 blocks have been allocated or assigned. We've got over 51,000/32 equivalents allocated. And we have 3.2 million/48 equivalents assigned. And there are 172,000 total IPv6 reassignments and reallocations that have been made. 172 reassignments have been made. Now, if you're going to go through the trouble of getting an IPv6 block directly from ARIN, that's great. Doesn't mean you're deploying it the next day. It might not even be the next year. It just needs to be in the next couple of years. But if you're going to go through the trouble of actually creating reassignments in the database, that means you're doing something with that IPv6 address space. We have over 172,000 of those. And 61% of those were created just since the beginning of 2018. There seems to be a lot more activity than usual. Now, if you look at the snapshots of some of the data that other organizations are providing, right now, today, this meeting is inside the United States, so we feature the United States. Google says 36% of all the traffic that goes to their services comes over the V6 network, globally 28%. Facebook says it's 56.5% from the US and 25% globally. And Akamai says it's 48% in the US and 22% globally. And they keep this updated on a regular rotation at each of those websites there if you want to check that out. Now, if you raised your hands earlier or you did anything to support this effort over the years, I've got to tell you that it could not have happened without your volunteer time. I mean, you guys support this organization. You have staff members that went out and facilitated this. We were getting paid very specifically for doing that. You guys that raised your hands in the audience, you didn't. You actually volunteered your own time to do this. And we really do appreciate it. And I think you guys do deserve a round of applause for everything that you did over the years. Now, I don't think that we're going to go do reverse exhibiting at CES again. I don't think that'll happen again. And there might not be time-intensive things like that needed again going forward into the future. But we still need your help because IPv6 isn't all the way there yet. We know that. There's still more that people need to hear. The ARIN organization itself plans to sustain the current level of outreach with our IPv6 case studies and some other work that we're doing in the area. We're adding IPv6 training programs. The ARIN Board of Trustees has asked the ARIN organization to stand up training this year, and we're aggressively working on that. And we'd like to know from you guys if you think even more than that is needed. And so what we're asking is if you have any ideas about what you'd like to see at ARIN going forward to further promote IPv6 adoption or deployment, please send us email at get6@arin.net. And thank you very much.
Any questions for Richard or regarding our IPv6 outreach? Okay, and
Got Paul Wilson coming up to the mic.
Yep. Yes. The esteemed Paul Wilson.
Oh, thank you. It's the esteemed Paul Wilson from APNIC, for the record. It's an interesting perspective to talk about going into the fourth decade, but it does sound like we might have been carrying on about IPv6 for 40 years, which isn't right. I just thought for the record it's worth saying, yeah, we've been doing this for 20 years, and but as you know, Richard, you know, what we spent the first decade doing was countering a whole lot of crap that was going on about the imminent exhaustion of IPv4 and the urgent need to get IPv6 started, and the fact that it would cure world hunger and all sorts of stuff. And so we spent our time pointing out that nothing really big was going to happen until IPv4 ran out, and that was going to be happening around the middle of the 2010s, I think. I think we got it pretty right.
We did.
And we did spend our time kind of preparing our communities and making sure they understood that the time to move was not yet, but when they wanted to move, they would need to move with some knowledge that we could help to provide them. And the end result of that process was actually that we started to see this very substantial IPv6 deployment happening at about the time that we always said. So, you know, I just wanted to sort of point out it hasn't been quite the 40-year hard slog that you mentioned, or that your words might have been interpreted as, and in fact, you know, a lot of what we did in the first decade was damage control against a whole stack of crazy talk about the need for IPv6.
Indeed.
Yeah, I was going to say, Paul, the RIR portion of it has predominantly been the last decade. Truly, that's the case. And while the IETF and the vendor communities, all the operating systems and equipment, started it earlier, and certainly it took a bit of time to get the software in all the right places. The role of the RIR has been the last year. On the other hand, it's also true that if we're not aggressive, we're not sure how many decades more we'll be at this. And so the question is, how much more should we be doing, and how do we go about doing it? Because for some people, there's a real barrier of having to maintain both V6 and V4. There's a cost, and we're not sure does the community want that cost? And if it doesn't want that cost, how does it want ARIN to help get us to the other side?
Well, I can't say what ARIN, the ARIN community wants you to do, but you know, the APNIC community for the last 20 years has had, well, up until about probably 5 years ago, has had IPv6 at the top of the list for what they asked APNIC to help with. So, you know, we all work together on that, and Richard, your presentation is a really interesting perspective on what's happened over that 20-year time. As it happens, for our community, V6 has gone to the second on the list after security.
Yeah.
So that's but it's still well up there, and we've got some detail from them about what they want us to do too.
Excellent. Thank you.
Look forward to continuing to work with you guys on it. Thanks.
Excellent. Fun, Mike?
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. So appreciated the memory lane. Something I don't know if you remember from CES was keeping the daily tally of the number of people that invented the internet that would come to the booth.
Yes, I do remember that. We would have people come to the booth and tell ARIN that we were newcomers because they had admitted portions of the internet, and in some cases, it, you know, literally was like VentSurf or something coming to the booth, but in other cases, it was just interesting, all the people that came out of the woodwork that wanted to let us know about those things. But it was a good thing. We were looking for people to talk to.
So that was the humor, but from the training perspective, there are a lot of organizations that can help with how to configure your routers. There's a lot of organizations that can help with the technical side of IPv6. What I am amazed by and constantly see, which is the one thing that ARIN is best suited for, is how to properly network out with IPv6. Not the physical touching of the routers and the net blocks and all of that, but actually coming up with workable plans that an organization doesn't find themselves 2 years after deployment having to start over again and ripping out their hair at that. And I would just suggest that the areas of expertise that ARIN has, to focus on that with training. There's a lot of stuff. If an organization wants to go down this route, they will get the help on the other things. But we have to get out of the mentality of scarcity, and that in this room is undoing decades of learning. And that's the same in an industry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Richard, for that great presentation.